There is a particular kind of pain that does not come with an argument. No shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic goodbye. It arrives quietly. You notice that your effort has become expected. Your kindness has become ordinary. Your presence has become convenient. You answer every call, so eventually nobody asks whether you are tired. You help whenever someone needs you, so eventually your help is no longer appreciated. You forgive quickly, so people begin to believe there is no cost to hurting you. And one day, you realize something uncomfortable. The problem may not be that people have stopped valuing you. The problem may be that you have taught them that they do not have to. That realization can hurt, because you remember every time you showed up, every message you answered, every opportunity you gave someone, every time you swallowed your frustration because you wanted peace, every time you stayed when leaving would have been easier. And then the question appears, why don't they appreciate me? But the Stoics would have asked a different question. Not, why are they treating me this way? But, what part of this situation belongs to me? That question changes everything. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Epictetus taught his students to distinguish between what belongs to our control and what does not. Our judgments, choices, desires, and actions belong to us. Other people's opinions, behavior, reputation, and decisions do not. At first, that sounds almost too simple. But imagine what it means. You cannot force someone to appreciate you. You cannot command someone to recognize your sacrifices. You cannot make someone suddenly understand your value. You cannot manufacture gratitude inside another person's mind. And if you build your peace around receiving those things, you have handed the keys to your emotional life to someone else. This is where most people make their first mistake. They confuse being valuable with being valued. Those are not the same thing. A person can be valuable and still be overlooked. A person can be loyal and still be taken for granted. A person can be generous and still be used. A person can be deeply loved and still experience moments of neglect. Human beings are imperfect observers. People often notice what disappears more than what remains. A light that is always on becomes invisible. A door that is always open stops feeling like a gift. A person who always forgives can eventually be mistaken for someone who can never leave. And here is the dangerous part. When you feel unappreciated, your ego begins searching for payment. You think, after everything I've done for them, I deserve more. They should realize what they lost. They need to see that I matter. Now your peace depends on recognition. You begin checking messages, watching reactions, counting favors, comparing effort, remembering who did what. You become an accountant of affection. And the more you calculate, the more exhausted you become. The Stoics offered another path, not becoming cold, not becoming cruel, not becoming someone who never helps, and certainly not becoming the kind of person who says, I don't need anyone. That is not strength. That is often wounded pride wearing armor. The Stoic response is more difficult. Give without making another person's gratitude the price of your peace. Help without abandoning yourself. Love without surrendering your judgment. Set boundaries without needing revenge. And when someone repeatedly takes you for granted, do not ask, how can I make them regret it? Ask, what behavior am I willing to continue participating in? That question moves your attention from their character to yours, from their choices to your choices, from resentment to responsibility. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling an enormous empire, repeatedly reminded himself in the Meditations that reputation, wealth, and other external things could not substitute for living according to virtue. His philosophical struggle was not theoretical. He was constantly reminding himself how easily the mind could become distracted by what others thought. And perhaps that is why this ancient philosophy still speaks so directly to modern relationships. Because being taken for granted is not only a relationship problem, it is a problem of attention, a problem of identity, a problem of boundaries, a problem of expectation, and sometimes a problem of self-respect. So tonight, we are going to walk through 10 Stoic lessons. Not 10 tricks for making people chase you, not 10 psychological games. Not 10 ways to manipulate someone into respecting you. Something deeper. We are going to discover how to respond when people fail to recognize what you give them, without allowing their blindness to change who you are. And the final lesson may be the hardest of all, because sometimes the strongest Stoic response is not to make someone appreciate you. It is to become completely comfortable with the possibility that they never will. And once you understand why, their behavior loses a power over you that you may not even realize you gave them. There is a strange paradox in human relationships. The more consistently you give, the easier it can become for others to stop noticing the giving. Think about something as ordinary as breathing. You rarely wake up and say, "I am grateful that I can breathe today." You notice breathing when it becomes difficult. The same psychological pattern can appear in relationships. When someone is always available, availability becomes normal. When someone is always forgiving, forgiveness becomes expected. When someone constantly solves problems, their competence becomes invisible. This does not necessarily mean the other person is evil. Sometimes people are simply accustomed to comfort, and comfort can distort perception. What was once extraordinary becomes ordinary. What was once appreciated becomes expected. And what becomes expected can eventually become demanded. This is why Stoicism is so useful here. Stoicism does not tell you to stop caring. It teaches you to care intelligently. Epictetus did not tell his students that relationships were meaningless. Instead, he warned them against confusing things belonging to others with things belonging to themselves. If another person's behavior determines your inner state, you have allowed something external to govern what should belong to your own faculty of choice. That distinction is incredibly important today. Imagine you send someone a thoughtful message. They read it and don't respond. You tell yourself they are busy, then hours pass. You check again, nothing. You tell yourself they don't care. Then you begin constructing a story. Maybe they are ignoring you. Maybe they found someone better. Maybe you did something wrong. Maybe they don't respect you. Now the original event was tiny, but your interpretation has become enormous. The Stoics understood that the mind does not merely experience events, it interprets them. And those interpretations can create suffering far beyond the original event. So throughout this video, remember one principle. You are not responsible for forcing people to value you. You are responsible for deciding what you will accept, what you will give, and what kind of person you will remain. That distinction is the foundation. And we begin with the first lesson. Because before you can change how you respond to being taken for granted, you must understand what you are actually reacting to. Please share this with someone who needs. Lesson 1. Stop confusing their behavior with your value. The first mistake people make when they are taken for granted is incredibly subtle. They turn someone else's behavior into evidence about their own worth. Someone ignores you. You feel insignificant. Someone chooses another person. You feel replaceable. Someone doesn't thank you. You feel invisible. Someone criticizes you. You feel defective. But notice what happened. An external event occurred. Then your mind converted that event into an identity statement. They ignored me became I don't matter. They didn't appreciate me became I'm not valuable. Stoicism asks you to interrupt that transformation. Epictetus repeatedly returned to the idea that events themselves do not automatically determine our judgments about them. What matters is how the mind interprets what happens. This does not mean pretending everything is fine. It means refusing to make another person's behavior the judge of your existence. Consider Marcus Aurelius. He was emperor of Rome, surrounded by people who had political reasons to flatter him. Yet in his private meditations, he repeatedly warned himself against becoming dependent on reputation or public approval. The fact that he had enormous status did not eliminate the human temptation to care about what others thought. That is an important lesson. External success does not cure the desire for validation. You have to train your mind. Today, this becomes even harder because social media turns recognition into numbers. Likes, comments, views, followers, messages, read receipts. Someone posts a photograph and receives hundreds of reactions. You post something and receive almost nothing. The mind immediately starts ranking your worth. But numbers are not a moral measurement. Attention is not proof of virtue. Popularity is not proof of character, and someone's failure to appreciate you is not proof that you are unworthy. So what should you do? Separate the facts from the story. Fact: they didn't respond. Story: they don't respect me. Fact: they didn't invite me. Story: they secretly hate me. Fact: they stopped making effort. Story: I must not be important. The Stoic pauses between those two layers. That pause is freedom. Then ask 3 questions. What actually happened? What am I adding to it? What action would reflect the person I want to be? Maybe the answer is to communicate. Maybe it is to step back. Maybe it is to change the relationship. Maybe it is simply to stop chasing an explanation. But whatever you choose, choose it because it is right, not because you are trying to prove your worth. Remember this: someone else's failure to recognize your value does not reduce your value. It only reveals the limits of their recognition. And once you understand that, you are ready for the second lesson. Because there is another mistake even more dangerous than needing appreciation. You may be giving too much. Lesson 2: generosity without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. Stoicism values virtue, but virtue does not mean allowing everyone unlimited access to you. There is a difference between generosity and self-neglect. Imagine a person who says yes to everything. Yes to every request. Yes to every emergency. Yes to every favor. Yes to every apology. Yes to every last-minute demand. At first, people call them kind. Eventually, they simply call them available. And then something strange happens. The moment they finally say no, people become disappointed.
Why?
Because a pattern has been created. The problem is not necessarily that people are evil. The problem is that expectations grow around repeated behavior. Psychologically, humans adapt to repeated rewards. What feels special at first can become the new baseline. So, if you constantly sacrifice your time, sacrifice becomes expected. If you constantly rescue someone from consequences, rescue becomes expected. If you constantly tolerate disrespect, tolerance becomes expected. And eventually, your kindness is no longer experienced as generosity. It becomes infrastructure. The Stoics would tell you to examine the role you are playing. Epictetus warned that freedom requires caring primarily about what is within our power, rather than becoming dependent on externals. Your time is not infinite. Your attention is not infinite. Your energy is not infinite. Therefore, giving them away without judgment is not necessarily virtuous. Musonius Rufus, another Roman Stoic, emphasized disciplined living and the cultivation of virtue through practice rather than through appearances. The Stoic life was meant to be trained, not merely performed. That means learning to distinguish between "I can help" and "I must help." Those sentences are not the same. You can care about someone without solving every problem they create. You can love someone without protecting them from every consequence. You can be generous without becoming permanently available. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop making another person's irresponsibility comfortable. This matters in business too. If you are always taking on someone else's work, they may never learn to carry their responsibility. If you always discount your work, people may stop understanding its value. If you always answer instantly, you may teach people that your attention has no boundaries. So begin practicing a simple sentence. I can't do that. No long explanation. No apology for existing. No 5-minute defense of your decision. You do not need to become harsh. Say it calmly. I can't take that on. I won't be available tonight. That doesn't work for me. I've decided not to continue with this arrangement. Then observe what happens. Some people will respect the boundary. Some will test it. Some will become angry. And that reaction will teach you something. Because a healthy relationship can survive a reasonable boundary. A relationship built around your unlimited availability may not. The goal is not to become less generous. The goal is to make your generosity a choice rather than a reflex. Because when giving comes from freedom, it is generosity. When giving comes from fear of losing someone, it is self-abandonment. And there is a crucial distinction waiting in the next lesson. Sometimes people take you for granted because you have never told them what is happening. Lesson 3. Say what needs to be said before resentment speaks for you. One of the most destructive habits in relationships is silent expectation. You expect someone to notice. They don't. You become hurt. You say nothing. They continue. Your resentment grows. Then one day you explode, and suddenly they are confused. They think the explosion came from nowhere, but it didn't. It came from 100 conversations you had privately inside your own head. This is where Stoic discipline meets emotional intelligence. Emotional control does not mean emotional silence. A calm person can communicate difficult truths. In fact, calm communication often requires more courage than anger. Anger gives you momentum. Calmness gives you responsibility. Think about Socrates. He was famous in Athens for questioning assumptions openly rather than silently resenting them. The historical Socrates described in Plato's dialogues was willing to ask uncomfortable questions, even when those questions made powerful people uncomfortable. His method was not, "I will secretly judge you." It was, "Let us examine this." That attitude can transform relationships. Instead of, "You never appreciate anything I do." Try, "I've noticed that I've been taking on more responsibility than I can comfortably continue carrying." Instead of, "You don't respect me." Try, "When plans repeatedly change at the last minute, I feel that my time isn't being considered. I need that to change." Instead of, "Fine, I'll never help you again." Try, "I can help this time, but I can't keep taking responsibility for this." Notice the difference. The first statements attack identity. The second describes behavior. That matters psychologically. When you attack someone's character, they become defensive. When you describe a pattern and state a boundary, you create an opportunity for correction. The Stoic does not need to win the conversation. The Stoic needs to act with reason. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to respond to difficult people without becoming like them. His philosophy emphasized justice and the shared human community, not domination. That means you can be firm without becoming cruel. Speak once, clearly, respectfully, then watch behavior. Not promises, behavior. Because words can temporarily repair discomfort. Patterns reveal character, and here is where many people fail. They communicate a boundary, then immediately negotiate it away. "I don't like this, but okay, I won't do that anymore. But just this once. I need more respect, but don't be angry with me." Every time you make a boundary and immediately abandon it, you teach both yourself and others that your words are flexible. So let your words become trustworthy. If you say no, mean no. If you say you need distance, take distance. If you say a behavior is unacceptable, be prepared to act accordingly. Not dramatically, consistently. The strongest boundary is not a threat. It is a decision. And once you learn to communicate clearly, you discover something surprising. You may not need to make people feel guilty at all. Which leads to the fourth lesson. Lesson 4, do not turn your boundary into a punishment. There is a subtle difference between withdrawing your participation and punishing someone. One is self-respect. The other is revenge. Suppose someone has repeatedly taken you for granted. You decide to step back. That can be healthy. But then you think, I want them to notice. I want them to miss me. I want them to regret what they did. I want them to come crawling back. Now your boundary has become a performance. You are still emotionally attached to their reaction. You have physically walked away, but mentally you're standing at the window waiting to see whether they chase you. That is not freedom. Seneca spent considerable attention on anger because anger is connected to the desire to retaliate. Stoic ethics did not treat revenge as a form of strength. Instead, the goal was to prevent anger from controlling judgment and action. This is important because modern culture often romanticizes retaliation. Show them what they lost. Make them jealous. Disappear so they chase you. Give them the silent treatment. These tactics may generate temporary reactions, but they can also keep you psychologically attached to the very person you claim to have outgrown. The Stoic question is different. What action protects my dignity regardless of what they do next? That question is powerful. If you stop calling, stop because the relationship is no longer healthy. If you stop giving money, stop because the arrangement is unsustainable. If you leave a friendship, leave because continuing violates your principles. If you end a business relationship, do it because the partnership no longer works. Do not do it because you want to create pain. Cato offers an interesting historical example of this kind of distinction. Plutarch portrays him as severe in political matters, especially in his defense of justice, but also notes that after political conflicts, he could behave benevolently and kindly toward people. His firmness did not require permanent personal hatred. That is a valuable model. Firmness and hatred are not synonyms. You can say, "No," without saying, "I hate you." You can leave without humiliating. You can disagree without destroying. You can protect yourself without becoming obsessed with punishment. This is especially important in relationships. If someone repeatedly mistreats you, your responsibility is not to teach them a lesson. Their responsibility is to live with the consequences of their choices. Your responsibility is to decide what access they have to you. That is enough. So before you send that angry message, before you post that indirect quote, before you try to make someone jealous, stop. Ask, if they never see this, never regret it, and never apologize, would I still choose this action? If the answer is yes, you may be acting from principle. If the answer is no, you may still be acting for their attention. And the next lesson goes even deeper, because sometimes the person taking you for granted is not someone else. Sometimes it is you. Lesson 5, stop taking yourself for granted. There are people who complain that nobody values them while constantly violating their own needs. They say they want peace, then stay in endless conflict. They say they want discipline, then negotiate with every impulse. They say they want respect, then tolerate behavior they know is unacceptable. They say they want a better life, then repeatedly abandon their own goals to satisfy everyone else. This is self-betrayal. And it is difficult to build confidence while repeatedly breaking promises to yourself. The Stoics understood that character is built through practice, not declarations, not intentions. Practice. Musonius Rufus emphasized that philosophy should shape how a person actually lives. Cato, too, became known not merely for talking about simplicity and discipline, but for practicing an austere lifestyle in public and private. Plutarch describes his simple habits, labor, and restraint as part of the character people observed in him. That is why self-respect begins with small promises. You say you will wake at a certain time. Wake! You say you will train. Train. You say you will finish the work. Finish. You say you will stop contacting someone who repeatedly harms you. Stop. You say you will save money. Save. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you send your mind evidence. My word matters. Every time you repeatedly break one, you send the opposite message. This is why confidence cannot simply be spoken into existence. Your brain learns from your behavior. If you constantly abandon yourself to keep other people comfortable, you eventually begin to believe that your needs are less important. Then being taken for granted by others becomes almost predictable. Not because you deserve it, but because you have become accustomed to taking yourself for granted first. So create a daily practice. At the end of each day, ask, where did I respect myself today? Where did I betray myself? Where did I say yes because I wanted to? Where did I say yes because I was afraid? Where did I remain silent because silence was wise? Where did I remain silent because I was afraid to speak? These questions create self-awareness. And self-awareness creates choice. The goal is not selfishness. The goal is alignment. You should be able to help another person without disappearing. You should be able to love without abandoning your principles. You should be able to compromise without surrendering your identity. Because the strongest relationship you will ever have is the one between your values and your actions. And once that relationship becomes stable, something changes. You stop begging other people to tell you who you are. You already know, but there is still another trap. Even after you establish boundaries, you may continue obsessing over whether people understand them. That brings us to Lesson 6. Lesson 6. Stop waiting for people to agree with your boundaries. A boundary is not truly a boundary if it requires permission from the other person. This is one of the hardest lessons to accept. You may calmly explain why you need distance. They may call you selfish. You may refuse to lend more money. They may call you cold. You may stop answering disrespectful messages. They may accuse you of changing. You may finally prioritize your own work. Someone may tell you that you are becoming arrogant, and suddenly you begin doubting yourself. Maybe I'm being unreasonable. Maybe I should explain more. Maybe they misunderstood. Sometimes you should reflect, but reflection is different from surrender. Epictetus taught that other people's judgments and opinions belong to them, not to your faculty of choice. He even advised students not to build their lives around being thought a certain way by others. This is especially relevant in the age of constant commentary. Everyone has an opinion. Family, friends, co-workers, followers, strangers. You can spend your entire life trying to create a version of yourself that nobody criticizes. You will fail. Marcus Aurelius understood the futility of living for reputation. His meditations repeatedly return to the idea that empty fame and other people's judgments are unstable compared with living according to one's nature and principles. So learn to tolerate misunderstanding. This is a form of emotional strength. You do not need everyone to agree that your boundary is reasonable. You need to know whether it is reasonable. That is different. If someone says, "You've changed," you can answer, "Yes, I've changed some things because they were no longer working for me." No anger, no lecture, no courtroom defense. If someone says, "You're selfish," you can ask yourself privately, am I actually being selfish, or am I simply no longer overextending myself? If the answer is the latter, remain steady. A mature person can tolerate being misunderstood. That does not mean refusing feedback. It means refusing to make popularity the final authority on your decisions. The Stoic does not ask, "Will everyone approve?" The Stoic asks, "Is this consistent with wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control?" Those are better judges. And now we reach a deeper issue. Lesson 8. Watch what happens when you stop overgiving. You learn a great deal about a relationship when you change the pattern, not by creating drama, by simply becoming balanced. You stop answering immediately. You stop solving every problem. You stop paying every bill. You stop initiating every conversation. You stop accepting every last-minute request. You continue being respectful, but you stop being endlessly available. Then watch. A healthy person may ask, "Is everything okay?" They may notice that the relationship has become unbalanced. They may adjust. A person who benefited from your overgiving may react very differently. They may accuse you of changing. They may guilt-trip you. They may suddenly remind you of everything they have supposedly done for you. They may become angry because the old arrangement was convenient. This is why behavior after a boundary is more informative than behavior before it. Before the boundary, they had no reason to reveal how they felt about your limits. After the boundary, you get information. Cato's life offers a useful historical contrast here. Plutarch describes him as someone whose conduct could be severe and uncompromising in matters he considered matters of principle, while also noting his benevolence toward people outside those political conflicts. His firmness was not simply indiscriminate hostility. That distinction matters. You do not need to become suspicious of everyone. You need to become observant. There is a difference between paranoia and discernment. Paranoia says, everyone is using me. Discernment says, I will pay attention to patterns. The paranoia assumes bad intentions. Discernment observes behavior. And patterns matter. Does this person only call when they need something? Do they disappear when you need support? Do they respect your no? Do they remember your problems or only their own? Do they apologize and change? Do they appreciate your presence or merely demand your availability? These questions are not about judging someone's soul. They are about deciding how much access they should have to your time and energy. You don't need to label someone toxic. You need to notice whether the relationship is healthy. And if it isn't, you do not need a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful change is simply reducing access. Less availability, less emotional investment, less explanation, less rescue, more observation, more boundaries, more attention to your own life, because your attention is one of the most valuable things you possess. And Lesson 9 will show you why giving that attention to resentment is one of the most expensive mistakes you can make. Lesson 9, do not let resentment become your new identity. Being hurt is an event. Living inside the hurt is a choice. That distinction can be difficult when someone has genuinely wronged you. You may think about it every morning. You replay conversations. You imagine what you should have said. You picture them realizing their mistake. You create imaginary confrontations. You check whether they are doing well. You wonder whether they miss you. You tell friends the story again, and again, and again. Eventually, the person who hurt you may occupy more space in your mind than people who love you. They may be gone, but psychologically, they are still living rent-free inside your attention. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes a discipline of attention. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly instructed himself to return his mind to the present task and to avoid being consumed by reputation, resentment, and distractions. His writings reveal a person repeatedly practicing this return, rather than someone who magically achieved perfect tranquility. That is an important distinction. Stoicism is not the absence of emotional disturbance. It is the practice of governing your response. So when resentment appears, do not argue with the emotion. Observe it. Yes, I am angry. Then ask, what is this anger asking me to do? If it asks you to retaliate, pause. If it asks you to communicate, communicate. If it asks you to leave, consider leaving. If it asks you to improve a boundary, improve it. But do not automatically obey it. Emotion is information. It is not always instruction. Modern psychology increasingly recognizes the importance of emotional regulation, the ability to experience emotions without allowing them to dictate every behavior. That is exactly the kind of discipline Stoicism trains. And here is a powerful exercise. When you catch yourself replaying an old interaction, say, "This is finished. What remains is my next action." Then physically move. Stand up. Walk. Return to work. Exercise. Read. Call someone you love. Do something that reconnects your attention to the life in front of you. Because healing is not only understanding the past, it is repeatedly choosing the present. And perhaps most importantly, stop building your identity around what happened. Do not become the person who was betrayed, the person who was abandoned, the person nobody appreciated, the person who was used. Those things may be chapters. They do not have to become your name. You are still becoming. You still have work to do, people to love, skills to develop, mistakes to correct, places to go, and a character to build. Which brings us to the final lesson. It is the one that makes all the others possible. Lesson 10. Your peace cannot depend on being appreciated. Imagine that you do everything right. You communicate honestly. You establish boundaries. You stop overgiving. You stop keeping score. You stop chasing approval. You become more disciplined. You stop retaliating. And still, someone does not appreciate you. What then? This is the final test. Because if your peace depends on the other person finally recognizing your value, you are still waiting for them. The Stoic goal is not, eventually they will understand. The goal is, I will live correctly whether they understand or not. Epictetus' distinction between what belongs to us and what does not reaches its deepest meaning here. Your choices belong to you. Another person's judgment does not. Your character belongs to you. Their opinion of it does not. Marcus Aurelius lived with extraordinary public power, yet his private philosophical writing repeatedly brings him back to the same discipline. Do your work well, live according to reason and justice, and do not make your life dependent on empty reputation. This is freedom, not the freedom to make everyone respect you, the freedom to stop requiring it. You can still want appreciation. Of course, you can still prefer relationships where people recognize your effort. Of course, Stoicism does not require you to become indifferent. It asks you not to become enslaved. There is a difference between preference and dependence. I would like them to appreciate me. Is healthy. I cannot be okay unless they appreciate me. Is dependence. That single distinction can transform your relationships. You stop performing. You stop testing. You stop disappearing to make people chase you. You stop posting things hoping someone notices. You stop doing favors as secret negotiations. You stop explaining your worth. You simply live. You give when giving is right. You refuse when refusal is right. You speak when speaking is necessary. You remain silent when silence is wiser. You leave when staying violates your principles. You stay when loyalty is honorable. You forgive when forgiveness is possible. You create distance when distance is necessary. And through all of it, you remain responsible for one thing, the quality of your character. That is what cannot be taken from you unless you surrender it. And perhaps that is the deepest answer to being taken for granted. You do not need to become harder. You need to become clearer. Clear about what you control. Clear about what you value. Clear about what you tolerate. Clear about what you give. Clear about why you give it. Clear about when to stay, clear about when to leave, and clear enough to understand that another person's blindness cannot erase your worth. There is a moment in every person's life when they have to decide what kind of heart they will carry forward. Maybe someone once took your kindness for weakness. Maybe someone received your loyalty and gave you indifference. Maybe you stayed through things that should have made you leave. Maybe you spent years trying to prove your value to someone who had already decided not to see it. Maybe you became exhausted from always being the understanding one. The easy response is bitterness. You begin thinking, I will never trust anyone again. I will stop caring. I will become cold. I will never give anyone the chance to hurt me. But ask yourself honestly, is that strength, or is it pain-making decisions for you? The Stoics offer something better, not a heart made of stone, a heart governed by judgment. You can remain kind without being naive. You can remain generous without becoming available to everyone. You can remain loving without abandoning yourself. You can forgive without reopening the same door. You can walk away without hatred. You can be misunderstood without collapsing. You can be rejected without becoming worthless. You can be ignored without becoming invisible. And you can be taken for granted without taking yourself for granted. That last one matters most, because perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that someone failed to appreciate you. It is that you allowed their failure to make you forget who you were. Think of the 10 lessons. First, do not confuse their behavior with your value. Second, do not allow generosity to become self-abandonment. Third, say what needs to be said before resentment speaks for you. Fourth, do not turn your boundary into a punishment. Fifth, stop taking yourself for granted. Sixth, stop waiting for people to approve your boundaries. Seventh, give without keeping a secret scorecard. Eighth, watch what happens when you stop overgiving. Ninth, do not allow resentment to become your identity. And finally, do not make your peace dependent on being appreciated. This is not a philosophy of weakness. It is a philosophy of responsibility. The Stoics did not teach that you should accept everything. They taught you to distinguish. What can I change? What must I accept? What deserves my attention? What deserves my distance? What belongs to my character? What belongs to someone else's choices? That distinction is the beginning of emotional freedom. So the next time someone takes you for granted, do not immediately react. Pause. Breathe. Observe. Then ask yourself, what is actually happening? What story am I creating around it? Have I communicated clearly? Have I allowed this pattern? What boundary is necessary? What action would I respect myself for taking tomorrow? And then act quietly, firmly, without theater, without revenge, without begging, without needing the other person to applaud your decision. Because the strongest boundary is not the one that makes someone else afraid of losing you. It is the one that makes you unwilling to lose yourself. And there will be people who never understand your value. Let them. There will be people who misunderstand your boundaries. Let them. There will be people who only recognize what you meant to them after you are no longer available. Let them learn. You do not have to stand outside their house waiting for the lesson to arrive. Your life is happening now. Return to it. Return to your work. Return to your health. Return to your family. Return to your purpose. Return to the people who love you without requiring you to constantly prove your usefulness. Return to yourself, because your life is too valuable to spend it trying to convince someone else of your value. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that a person should focus on living well rather than on how that life appears to others. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when we stop treating what belongs to others as though it belongs to us. And Cato's example reminds us that firmness can exist alongside human warmth, that strength does not require cruelty. So let this be your reflection tonight. You do not need to become less caring. You need to become more deliberate about where your care goes. You do not need to stop loving. You need to stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. You do not need to demand respect. You need to live in a way that respects your own principles. And you do not need to make everyone appreciate you. You only need to make sure that you are not the person who fails to appreciate the life you have been given. There is a quiet power in that. The power to give without begging, to leave without revenge, to speak without fear, to remain silent without resentment, to love without losing yourself, and to walk through the world knowing that your worth was never something another person had the authority to grant or take away. So the next time someone takes you for granted, remember, you are not required to become harder because someone failed to value your softness. You are required to become wiser about where you place it. And perhaps that is the real Stoic response. Not, now they will regret losing me, but I will no longer lose myself trying to be valued by someone else. That is where your freedom begins. And if this message spoke to something you are experiencing right now, don't just listen to it. Practice it. Choose one boundary, one conversation, one habit, one place where you have been abandoning yourself, and change it. Not tomorrow. Today.